Today I want to talk about an interesting psychological phenomenon in which admiration for admirable persons turns to envy and resentment, and at the extreme leads to resentment of the virtues themselves, and even the denial that the virtues are admirable traits. Søren Kierkegaard, often called the father of existentialism, was one of the most perceptive writers on envy. He interpreted it as a distortion of admiration and argued that envy is a constant temptation for people who feel admiration, but some ages handle it better than others. In his work, The Present Age, Kierkegaard writes, "It is a fundamental truth of human nature that man is incapable of remaining permanently on the heights, of continuing to admire anything. Human nature needs variety. Even in the most enthusiastic ages, people have always liked to joke enviously about their superiors. That is perfectly in order and is entirely justifiable, so long as after having laughed at the great, they can once again look upon them with admiration." In Greece, for example, the form envy took was ostracism, a self-defensive effort on the part of the masses to preserve their equilibrium in the face of the outstanding qualities of the eminent. The outstanding man was exiled, but everyone understood that ostracism was a mark of distinction. I find Kierkegaard's mention of exile as a response to admiration rather amusing. If we cannot bear being around admirable persons, we can always send them away. That is more honest than denying that the admirable is admirable. We see lots of examples of the latter in the delight people get in seeing admired persons revealed as having secret vices or unmasked as hypocrites. There's a gleeful pleasure in finding out that someone is not an exemplar after all. Books have been written denigrating Mother Teresa, Thomas More, and even Jesus. If we perceive the exemplar as a reproach, we will find our emotion painful. There's more than one way to remove the pain. Emulating the exemplar is one way. Denigrating the exemplar is the other option. In the passage I just quoted, Kierkegaard noticed something that Nietzsche later made famous: the ingenious ways in which the envious person can deprive the envied person of the good she possesses. These ways can become entrenched in a whole culture and affect the language we adopt in describing admirable persons. Nietzsche calls this phenomenon ressentiment, and he blames it on Christianity. He thinks it arises out of the helplessness of the weak when faced with the superiority of the powerful. The response is to resent the powerful and to call their virtues evil, and the vices of the weak virtues. In this way, good and evil are reversed. In response, the early 20th century philosopher Max Scheler agreed that our culture is steeped in ressentiment, but he argued that the source of it is not Christianity, but a kind of egalitarianism that refuses to acknowledge that there is such a thing as a morally superior person, and which functions as a protest against the virtues. It seems to me that it is common to resent people who are outstanding, and the resentment is not just directed towards saints, but to people whose superiority takes other forms. Consider Sir Robert Falcon Scott. He led a famous expedition to the South Pole in 1912 under very arduous circumstances, leading to the death of the entire party. Months later, notebooks were found under his body, giving a chronicle of their ordeal, and he became an iconic hero. But in 1985, there was a book published debunking his reputation, which got attention for a while, until books were published restoring it. I'm not qualified to say whether Scott was really a hero or whether Mother Teresa was really a saint, but I wonder why so many books that aim at unmasking admired persons are written and get so much attention. One possible excuse is that nobody wants to read a book that reveals that someone generally taken to be admirable is in fact admirable. That would be boring. Why take the trouble to read a book that tells you something you already know? That's a partial explanation, but if the desire to reveal the unexpected were the motive, there should also be many books revealing that the person perceived to be contemptible is actually admirable. But I don't think there are many of those. I suggest that people tend to find it more pleasant to find out that the reputedly good person is bad than to find out that the reputedly bad person is good. It's interesting that in the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke's Gospel, the purportedly contemptible person is the only one who shows mercy. But the people Jesus was addressing did not enjoy the story. That was not what they wanted to hear. I think this means that we want our exemplars to be likable as well as admirable. Some people we admire are boring or humorless or annoying. People like that are not very helpful to us. We want interesting and likable exemplars, and we particularly like exemplars whose lives make good movies. It seems to me that very few saintly people are interesting on the screen, although Gandhi is an exception. But would any of us want to watch a movie about a sage? I have a high tolerance for movies without much action, but even I would have trouble watching a movie about the life of Confucius. In an earlier video, I mentioned Chief Plenty-Coup of the Crow Nation as an example of a wise person, and I think his life would be great as a movie. But there does seem to be a shortage of action and visual imagery in many admirable lives. Maybe we can talk about the way narratives about admirable persons can be used in our culture. Not every good story makes a good movie, but we need ways to learn these stories, and we need ways to reflect about our own emotional reactions to them.